So the way that most beginners understand aperture is simply the setting on our camera that gives that blurry background, aka the bokeh. And we're taught that the lower the f-stop, this number right here, the blurrier the background we can achieve to the point where we can just melt the background away. And while it does look nice, this actually creates a lot of problems. 1. Beginners are led to believe this is the only way to get blurry backgrounds. 2. When they start shooting at these lower f-stop numbers, they're struggling to get the sharpest results. And 3. Lenses that don't have a minimum of f1.8 on prime lenses or f2.8 on zoom lenses are automatically terrible. We gotta chuck them out into the trash can. Forget about them, don't even buy them, don't even waste your time. And these issues exist because beginners are only taught the surface level of aperture. But after understanding these 6 concepts that I'm about to show you, you will be a pro. But first, let's go back to the basics. Level 1, big hole versus small hole. So aperture is the hole in your lens that controls how much light comes into the sensor. The larger the hole, the more light comes in. The smaller the hole, the less light comes in. Makes sense, right? But the numbering does get a little confusing. I have here the 50mm f1.4. When you turn your lens to f1.4, that's gonna be the largest hole of this lens. And when you turn your lens to f16, that's gonna be the smallest hole of this lens. So we kind of have a bit of an inverse going on right here, right? Smaller the number, bigger the hole. Bigger the number, smaller the hole. And aperture is a way for us to control depth. Now the iPhone actually does a great job illustrating this. Even though the blur is simulated, it does a great job teaching us how changing the aperture number affects our blur. Pay attention as I move the slider from f4 to f1.4. The background gets blurrier. And when I move over to f16, more of that background becomes in focus. You're gonna hear terms like wider aperture, which means bigger hole, narrow or closed down aperture, smaller hole. And you're also gonna hear terms like faster aperture and slower aperture, which all means the same thing. Level 2, how to stop missing focus. So let's talk depth of field, right? And this is where most people would mess up on aperture and getting sharp images. So you're gonna hear terms like shallow depth of field and deep depth of field. Pulling up the chart again, same thing. Shallow, bigger hole, deeper, smaller hole. Now, shallow depth of field means you have a razor thin line of plane to get your subject in focus. And it took me years to understand this, but I'll clear it up for you right now. It's hard to visualize depth sometimes because we're looking at it from the front. But when we imagine it from a top-down bird's eye point of view, that's when it's gonna make more sense. This thin line right here represents f1.8, which is fitting because it has a thin depth of field. So when we're taking photos, it's important that we stay as steady as possible. If we're accidentally rocking back and forth, there's a strong chance where we would still miss focus, despite the camera telling us otherwise. Versus this thick line right here, which represents f8, we have a deeper depth of field. So even if we're accidentally swaying back and forth, there's a strong chance that we would still get our subject in focus. Level 3, how to get more blur with any lenses. So most people have the basic kit lens, right? And they think, oh, I can't get blurry backgrounds with this. And that's simply not true. Focal length can also have a lot to do with blur. For example, 18mm f3.5 versus 50mm f5.6. At 18mm, we're not getting a whole lot of blur, but by zooming into 50mm, boom, look at that, blurry background. A long telephoto lens, despite it not having the lowest f-stop, can still give you very blurry backgrounds. For example, some of these shots here are taken between 100 to 400mm focal length, varying from 4.5 to 5.6 aperture. And look at the background, butter. But of course, because the lens is so long, you will need a lot of distance, which brings me to level 4, how distance affects blur. And you can also get a blurry background at 18mm f3.5. You just simply have to get closer. Now, certain lenses have really good close focusing capability, which means how close you can get to your subject and still get tack sharp images. It doesn't necessarily have to be a macro lens. See, it doesn't matter if it's f3.5, 5.6, or even f8, the background is still gonna be blurry just because of how close you can get to your subject. Not gonna be the most flattering for every single subject, but knowing that knowledge now, how distance affects blurs, you can use it to your advantage the next time you go out and shoot. Level 5, avoiding the mistake that most beginners make, and that is shooting everything wide open. Just because you bought a fancy f1.2 lens doesn't mean you always have to shoot at f1.2. Here's an excerpt from my friend Professor Hines.
Now look at the difference between the 6.3 shot and the 1.8. This is why I don't shoot wide open for all of my shots, because we can't tell what the hell is in the background here. It's just a big blur. But in 6.3, we can actually see more of the environment. So that's why you want to play with your aperture. Even if you have a prime lens that's 1.8, 1.4, 1.2 even, don't use that for every photo because it doesn't always complement the entire composition the way that you think it will.
Level 6. So let's talk about choosing the best aperture. And the answer is, there is no best aperture. It just really depends on what you're going for and the conditions you're in. But I can give you some key pointers. For maximum blurry background, obviously shoot the widest you want. But if you're shooting landscape, well, generally f8 is going to be the safest bet. You want some of that light twinkle in your photo for the nightscape city shots, set it to f9 minimum, your ISO at 100, and compensate with your shutter speed. If you want everyone in a group photo to be in focus, but you refuse to stop down your aperture beyond f2.8, well then back up, because again, distance affects the blur. For more amazing photography tutorials by me, you can check out this playlist right here, including how to get sharper images and how to take better low light photos. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Stick around to listen to what my sponsor Squarespace has to say. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to create beautiful websites. You don't need any coding knowledge whatsoever. Simply just choose from their many easy-to-use templates. Perfect for people like us who want to focus on our travels and make YouTube videos for you guys, but still want a presentable website for brands that are looking to work with us. Whether you're building your own photography portfolio, an e-commerce store, or even a landing page for your business, design it with Squarespace. Get a 14-day trial with my link below and try it for yourself. When you're ready to launch, you can save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain with my code JasonVong. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you guys in our next video. Peace.